And the American people prove once again that democracy is who we are. And there was a strong rejection of election deniers at every level, from those seeking to lead our states and those seeking to serve in Congress, and also those seeking to oversee the elections. And there was a strong rejection of political violence and voter intimidation. There was an emphatic statement that in America, the will of the people prevails. I've traveled this week, and it's been clear just how closely the world and our allies and our competitors as well have been following our elections at home. Excuse me, I have a little cold. And what these elections showed is that there's a deep and unwavering commitment in America to preserving and protecting and defending democracy. Now, let me speak briefly about our agenda over the past few days in Egypt and in Cambodia and here in Indonesia. In this moment of great global challenges, from global inflation to the climate crisis to Russia's brutal war against Ukraine, we're bringing together the broadest possible coalition of partners to deliver results. At COP27 in Egypt, I made it clear that thanks to the bold agenda of our administration, we pursue from day one to tackle the climate crisis and advance energy and security at home and around the world. The United States will meet our emissions targets under the Paris Agreement. And we're going to keep working with our partners to support the most vulnerable countries in building resilience to climate impacts and to align global ambition with the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal while supercharging our clean energy transition. At the U.S.-ASEAN Summit and East Asia Summit, I laid out a commitment to working with our partners in the Indo-Pacific to ensure a future that's vital to this region, that's free and open and prosperous as well as secure. And I met with our allies from Australia, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, underscoring our commitment and deepening our engagement with our closest partners and strengthening cooperation among our allies to meet shared threats to our own security and to their security, including the DPRK. And let me meet, I just met in person with Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China. We had, we had an open and candid conversation about our intentions and our priorities. It was clear, he was clear and I was clear, that we'll defend American interests and values, promote universal human rights, and stand up for the international order and work in lockstep with our allies and partners. We're going to compete vigorously, but I'm not looking for conflict. I'm looking to manage this competition responsibly. And I want to make sure that every country abides by the international rules of the road. And we discussed that. The One China policy, our One China policy has not changed, We oppose unilateral change in the status quo by either side, and we're committed to maintaining the peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. It was also clear that China and the United States should be able to work together where we can to solve global challenges that require every nation to do its part. We discussed Russia's aggression against Ukraine, reaffirmed our shared belief in the threat or the use of nuclear weapons is totally unacceptable, and I asked that Secretary Blinken travel to China to follow up on our discussions and continue keeping the lines of communication open between our two countries. Looking ahead at the G20 meetings tomorrow, we're going to be taking on the very issues that matter to the people's lives, not only here, but also our allies and our partners. That means tackling the suffering that Russian aggression has unleashed, not just in Ukraine people, but the people around the world, particularly food insecurity, and strengthening the fundamentals of our global economy for everyone. Support for debt relief, reforms for multilateral development banks, investments to bolster global health security, and to make sure the world is better prepared for the next pandemic. The G20 has been an important forum for the world's largest economies to work together for the good of people everywhere, and I'm looking forward to our meetings tomorrow. Now let me close with this. On my first trip overseas last year, I said that America was back at home, back at the table, and back to leading the world. In the year and a half that's followed, we've shown exactly what that means. America is keeping its commitments. America is investing in our strength at home. America is working alongside our allies and partners to deliver real, meaningful progress around the world. And at this critical moment, No nation is better positioned to help build the future we want than the United States of America. Now, I'm happy to take questions, and I'm told there are going to be 4 questioners, but I'm not going to do 10 questions from each questioner. All right? Let's just make that clear at the outset here. And Ken Thomas, Wall Street Journal.
You said at the outset of this meeting that you did not want competition to turn into conflict. Based on this meeting today, do you believe a new Cold War with China can be avoided? And specifically on the issue of Taiwan, you spoke about intentions. Do you believe China is intending to invade Taiwan at some point? And what warnings did you issue to President Xi if he were to take such action?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I absolutely believe there need not be a new Cold War. I've met many times with Xi Jinping, and we were candid and clear with one another across the board. And I do not think there's any imminent attempt on the part of China to invade Taiwan. And I made it clear that our policy on Taiwan has not changed at all. It's the same exact position we've had. I made it clear that we want to see cross-strait issues peacefully resolved, and so it never has to come to that. And I'm convinced that he understood exactly what I was saying. I understood what he was saying. And look, I think the United States is better prepared than any country in the world, economically and politically, to deal with the changing circumstances around the world. And I think that I think Xi Jinping we agreed that we would set up a set of circumstances where on issues that we had to further resolve details, we agreed that we would have our chief of staff, the appropriate cabinet members and others sit and meet with one another to discuss the details of every issue that was raised, and we raised a lot of issues. Sung Kim, Associated Press.
Mr. President, you met with President Xi, and you met with him face-to-face after he had unquestionably consolidated his power at home. So now that you've met with him face-to-face, how do you assess his sort of posture towards the United States now? And did you find him personally to be more confrontational or more conciliatory and willing to compromise?
Neither and yes. Yes, I didn't find him more confrontational or more conciliatory. I found him the way he's always been, direct and straightforward. And do I think he's willing to compromise on various issues? Yes. I think he understands that, look, I think, how can I say this tactfully? I think the election held in the United States, which still leaves a little bit uncertain, has sent a very strong message around the world that the United States is ready to play. The United States is, the Republicans who survived, along with the Democrats, are of the view that we're going to stay fully engaged in the world and that we, in fact, know what we're about. And so I don't get any sense that there's more or less confrontation. We were very blunt with one another about places where we disagreed or where we were uncertain of each other's position, and we agreed we'd set up, and we did, mechanisms whereby we would meet in detail with the key people in each of our administrations to discuss how we could resolve them, or how, if they weren't resolved, on what basis were they not resolved. Sebastian Smith, the AFP.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's extremely close. Excuse me, I don't usually talk that loudly. Does the retaking of Kherson in Ukraine signal a turning point in the war, in your opinion? That the Ukrainians could realistically pursue their ultimate goal of expelling the Russians completely, including retaking Crimea? If so, does the US intend to support and facilitate that goal, as you've been doing so far with their other goals? Or would you perhaps see Kherson as a different kind of inflection point, basically a good time to start negotiating now that they've got some more strength than they had, a few weeks ago?
First of all, it was a significant, significant victory for Ukraine. Significant victory. And I can do nothing but applaud the courage, determination, and capacity of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military. I mean, they have really been amazing. And I think it's hard to tell at this point exactly what it means in terms of, but I've been very clear that we're going to continue to provide the capability for the Ukrainian people to defend themselves, and we are not going to engage in any negotiation. There's nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. It's a decision Ukraine has to make. I think you're going to see things slow down a bit because of the winter months and the inability to move as easily around the country. But I think it remains to be seen exactly what the outcome will be, except that I'm confident that Russia will not occupy or defend Ukraine as they intended from the beginning. I have trouble reading this. Reuters, Natanja Bose.
President, quick question on North Korea, which appears poised to conduct a new nuclear test. I'm wondering if you can talk about your specific discussions with President Xi on that. To what extent do you think China has the ability to talk North Korea out of conducting such tests? And what are the repercussions for U.S.-Chinese relations if a test goes forward?
Well, first of all, it's difficult to say that I am certain that China can control North Korea, number one. Number two, I made it clear to President Xi Jinping that I thought they had an obligation to attempt to make it clear to North Korea that they should not engage in long-range nuclear tests. And I made it clear as well that if they did, they, meaning North Korea, that we would have to take certain actions that would be more defensive on our behalf, and it would not be directed against North Korea. It would not be directed against China, but it would be to send them a clear message to North Korea. We are going to defend our allies as well as American soil and American capacity. And so, but I do not think that it's difficult to determine whether or not China has the capacity. I'm confident China is not looking for North Korea to engage in further escalatory means, because I made it clear, and I made it clear from the very beginning and last year as well, that we will do what it needs to defend our capacity, to defend ourselves and our allies, South Korea as well as Japan, and that we'd be more up in the face of China, but it wouldn't be because of China. It'd be because of what was going on in North Korea. So, again, on a number of these issues, we have put together teams where our National Security Advisor, Secretary of Defense, and others are going to be engaging with their counterparts from China to see, and we're not going to be able to work everything out. I'm not suggesting this is kumbaya, everybody is going to go away with everything in agreement. But I do not believe there's a need for concern of as one of you raised the legitimate question, a new Cold War. And I think that, I'll conclude by saying it this way. I want to be clear, and be clear with all leaders, but particularly with Xi Jinping, that I mean what I say and I say what I mean. So there's no misunderstanding. That's the biggest concern I have is a misunderstanding about intentions or actions on each of our parts. So we went into, I look at my team, how long did that meeting last? 3.5 hours. So we covered an awful lot of territory. And I must say that he was as straightforward as he has been with me in the past. And I think that we understand one another, which is the most important thing that can be done. I guess all of you are going swimming from here. It's not far. But
Mr. President, what should Americans expect from Congress as it relates to abortion rights after the midterms?
I don't think they can expect much of anything other than we're going to maintain our positions. I'm not going to get into more questions. I shouldn't even answer your question. No, I don't think that. I don't think there's enough votes to codify unless something happens unusual in the House. I think we're going to get very close in the House, but I think it's going to be very close, but I don't think we're going to make it.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
All right, we've been listening to President Biden in Indonesia ahead of the G20 summit. And joining us now to talk a little bit more about what we heard is CBS News foreign policy and national security contributor H.R. McMaster. He's also a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General who served as the 25th National Security Advisor of the United States. So glad to see you. So this is not, the Joe Biden of September when he said that if China was to attack Taiwan, of course the U.S. would defend Taiwan, and then his spokespeople had to sort of walk it back. Much more measured and careful about his approach to Taiwan and other issues connected to China.
Yes, and Anne-Marie, and it's clear that he's prepared well for this. I think it's important for these summits to use the right language, to use the right phrase, and to avoid certain phrases as well. So I'm sure there were a number of prep sessions with the National Security Advisor and others to ensure that he spoke consistent with longstanding U.S. policy on Taiwan and on other issues as well.
So, General, one of the things that he made clear is that he doesn't believe, in his estimation, that China will make any kind of military moves towards Taiwan. And I know, having been in briefings with several members of the United States military throughout the course of the last couple of years, that they do believe that China is a sleeping dragon. In other words, we need to be aware of their capabilities and their machinations. But this is the clearest, I think, that the president has ever been about his sentiment towards Xi Jinping and the possibility of any kind of military incursion into Taiwan. What did you make of that?
Well, I think it's important, especially if the president said, hey, listen, there's no way that you can accomplish your objectives on Taiwan, vis-a-vis Taiwan, through the use of force at an acceptable cost to you. And the cost would be exorbitant militarily, I think, to China. I think China hopefully is learning the lessons of Russia's failed offensive in Ukraine to recognize, hey, it's not that easy to attack across the 150 miles of what is often a stormy Taiwanese strait to try to subsume a territory the size of Maryland, which is quite mountainous in the east, as you're showing, and then of course the population is concentrated on the west side of the island, across the strait from China, in dense urban areas. There are mud flats. The Taiwanese military is becoming more and more capable, and of course the logistics challenges of sustaining an offensive like that are immense. I think what we have to be concerned about, Vlad, is our actions really short of a full-out invasion in China's efforts to coerce Taiwan and to achieve annexation below the threshold of a full-out invasion. We saw a little bit of a dress rehearsal for that almost after Speaker Pelosi's visit and the pseudo-blockade under the guise of military exercises and live-fire exercises that China conducted.
So the expectations for the meeting between these two men was pretty low, but as I understand it, they spoke for hours. So obviously a good conversation was had. Historically, sort of China and the U.S., they have been at odds in some areas, but they have worked together in other areas. Where do you see areas of cooperation for both countries?
Hey, I'll tell you, Anne-Marie, I don't think it looks very good. I mean, there are some areas for sure. How about food security, right? I think China, is struggling probably at this moment to feed its own people. And of course, that relates in large measure to Russia's continued brutalizing of Ukraine, so cutting off a huge part of the world's supply chains. How about energy security? How about trying to get economic growth going again? The Chinese leadership has done really a great job at killing their economy with a crackdown on the tech sector, the zero COVID policies. So I think that the Chinese Communist Party is under immense pressure. And I'm hoping that the President Biden went in there knowing that he's in a position of extraordinary strength, I think, at this moment, given the degree to which China, through its own unwise policies and through Chinese aggression since the pandemic, I mean, Emery, it's really important, I think, to look at some of the content of this wolf warrior diplomacy to see how aggressive China has been in undermining, the U.S. and attacking the U.S., but also supporting Russia in its brutal offensive against the Ukrainian people, with just parroting all the Russian disinformation and so forth. You've had campaigns of economic coercion against Australia, against Lithuania. You've had physical aggression in the South China Sea, ramming and sinking Vietnamese vessels. They have these hundreds of vessels, this maritime militia that they're using to occupy reefs and to weaponize islands in the South China Sea. They've bludgeoned Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier. So, Emery, I just think that this is a moment at which the world is starting to realize, hey, we have a problem. And I think the choice is no longer between Washington and Beijing. It's between sovereignty and servitude. So I think the United States, the free world's in a strong position on these dialogues, Anne-Marie, and these efforts to get the dialogues going. Mm-hmm. I would be skeptical about it. I would be very skeptical about it because I think what the Chinese Communist Party wants, what Xi Jinping wants, is he wants to lull us back into complacency. These sustained economic dialogues, the sustained security dialogues, I mean, it makes you feel good a little bit. You're talking. But really what the Chinese Communist Party has done really well is hold out the prospects of new policies, hold out the prospects of reform, so we won't compete effectively. So I hope we maintain our resolve, and I think the Biden administration should get a lot of credit, on export controls involving semiconductors, for example. I hope we continue these very important competitive policies.
So, General, before we let you go, let me ask you, just jumping off on something you just said, the choice that other nations have when it comes to the United States and China. I wonder, are we still competitive with countries that, yes, big picture, they perhaps would want to be in the sphere of influence that the United States offers, but you know how things work in Washington, where we're at the most divisive we've ever been in our nation's history, and sending money or material to other countries that are not necessarily strategic in our strategic interest is something that Washington struggles to do. So if you're a poor country and China is offering to build your roads and offering to provide you with medical equipment and medical supplies and to help heal your people, and the United States is just there to offer freedom, as opposed to what you said, servitude, it makes it very hard for a world leader to say, yeah, I'll take that freedom while my people are suffering and struggling, whereas China is offering real change that just means that I can't be in your camp anymore. So my question is, how competitive are we in that regard? We used to be very competitive during the Cold War that we had with the Soviet Union when we would do those things for those countries. We rebuilt Germany and we rebuilt Western Europe. But how are we doing now when it comes to that particular aspect of this relationship?
I'll tell you, Vlad, I think we're really competitive because, what we do is we help countries, build their own institutions in countries where people want to say and how they're governed, in countries that want, rule of law. We have very effective assistance programs. Now, you have to have a willing partner locally. And what China does very well is export its authoritarian mercantilist model to other authoritarian regimes. I mean, to Zimbabwe, to Cambodia, to Laos. I mean, they have a very strong grip in those countries because they are also, helping them with their technologically enabled police state that China has established internally. And also, Vlad, I think a lot of countries now are realizing, hey, when you get aid from China, it's not aid, it's loans. And these are debt traps, and there are strings attached. And there are all these non-transparent agreements. Like, a lot of the debt can be immediately recalled if you even criticize the Chinese Communist Party, who, by the way, is, committing genocide in Xinjiang, for example, and employing slave labor. So I think we're in a very competitive advantage, especially when you look at the degree we can use our free market economic system and investments that actually get a return on investments. A lot of these Chinese infrastructure projects, I mean, they're designed to establish that debt trap, to dump a lot of overproduced Chinese goods into those economies, to use Chinese companies, Chinese banks for the loans, Chinese labor, right? So it's not a good deal. And in a lot of countries, you have a great deal of pushback now. You've seen that in Ecuador, for example, a really dramatic rejection of the economic relationship, China and financial relationship China established in Kenya just in recent days. There have been actions by lawmakers there and a lot of coverage in the press about the predatory nature of these economic and financial arrangements. And the U.S., what we bring is we bring investment that will get returns on investment, and our loans back projects where local people are employed. Same thing with Japan and the rest of the free world. Japan's investment, for example, across the Indo-Pacific region is much larger than China's investment. And so I think it's what's important is to pull the curtain back on a lot of these Chinese loans under it's called the One Belt One Road project, and show what's happening. A lot of the infrastructure that's been built is now crumbling. And then these countries are indebted for many generations now, and this is really a way that China's trying to actually gain coercive influence, create servile relationships. I mean, I think you could even call it kind of a new form of colonialism. So whereas in the global South, you really, a lot of times there's a rejection of the West broadly because of the legacy of colonialism. I think a lot of countries in Africa, in our hemisphere, are beginning to realize that this is kind of a new form of colonialism that China's exporting.
Fascinating insight,
really
as
interesting.
always. General H.R. McMaster, thank you, sir, for joining us at the last minute. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great to be with both of you. Take care.
Thank you.
So still to come, Ukraine's president made a surprise visit to a key city just freed from Russian troops. Chris Livesay spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky. That conversation just after the break.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio is